While traversing through the world of Hyrule, we come across some absolutely horrifying creatures that no man should ever face. Wallmasters, Poes, Redeads, Stealthos, Blue Bubbles, and Gibdos can all be found in the Zelda titles. But where do these cursed creatures come from? And who made them? Well, today we will look into all of this and more, because the answer is a lot deeper than most would think. When you enter some of the most haunted locations in Hyrule, and even other countries like Termina, you will quite quickly see a shadow appear below you. Now at first you might wonder, what is that? Until you look up and realize that a gigantic hand is reaching out to grab you from the darkness. These creatures hang from the walls or ceilings of dark areas and dungeons, and attempt to grab you. Now if they succeed, they will take you back to the beginning of the dungeon or the specific room, sometimes at the cost of a heart. These are some of the most terrifying enemies seen in the series due to their surprise attack strategy. But where do these detached limbs come from? Well, that is a bit of a mystery. We have never seen their full body after all. But is there even some sort of original body that it came from? Well, in the artwork of the first Zelda title, it does look like that. The artwork from the Legend of Zelda instruction booklet looks like a hand that was ripped off a much bigger monster. However, we never see the body that it was attached to at any point in the Legend of Zelda games. But I have two potential answers for where these beings came from, and the first is rather simple. Out of all Ganon's minions, only one could be perfect for making a Wallmaster, the Moblin, a monster that Demon Kings and their later incarnations have always used as foot soldiers in their armies. If we look at their hands, we can see that they are relatively similar to a Wallmaster's, depending on the game of course, because there are loads of different designs. So maybe Ganondorf cut off the hand of one of these minions and turned it into a Wallmaster that we see in so many dungeons. Using dark magic, this could very well be possible. And after he does this, he uses his powers to regrow the hand of the Moblin, so he isn't a liability. This could explain why we never see a Moblin with just one hand. But obviously, there are some problems with this take. In some games, the Wallmasters and hands of Moblins look very different, and we never see any that miss hands. But I have another take. In the Wind Waker and Tears of the Kingdom, we see a version of the Wallmaster that comes from what looks like a new dimension. Link is even pulled into what seems like a portal that takes him back to the beginning of the dungeon, for example. So maybe these hands are actually a portion of a much bigger being that is, for the most part, still stuck in a completely different world. We've even seen in the past that Ganondorf is able to open portals to other places. For example, the gap between dimensions from which he pulled Phantom Ganon. It could even be that this dimension is the Twilight Realm, because we can see some similarities here. Midna's arm that comes out of the Fused Shadow looks a lot like a Floor Master from the Wind Waker. Meanwhile, Wallmasters are only seen in one location in Twilight Princess, the Domain of Zant, with his literal hands chasing you. So it could also be that originally, these creatures came from the realm in between light and dark. But again, we can't be certain if this is actually what happened. Information on these monsters is incredibly limited. However, there are many other nightmarish beings that we have to look at. Ghosts and spirits are seen in literally every Zelda game, and sometimes they help you, like the sages from long ago. However, other times, when Link ventures to graveyards or places that were long abandoned, he will come across vengeful spirits known as Poes. These are cloaked spirits that hold a lantern which serves as the container for their soul. And according to in-game lore, they became monsters because of an unresolved attachment to the mortal world. In many ways, they are stuck here. But why exactly? Well, in a lot of games, these spirits are imprisoned in the world of the living due to unfinished business or being cursed somehow. Flat and Sharp, seen both in Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, are a good example of this. They completed a study about controlling the flow of time via the use of ocarinas, and when Ganondorf tried to steal the results of their research and threatened to kill them, the brothers gave up their lives in order to protect their secrets. After this, they came back as Poes to defend their life's work. Only being laid to rest when Link defeated them and proved he was a force of good. This is a common thing we see in the games. However, it could also be that the Po is a much darker creature. These ghosts always hold a soul inside of a lantern with them, and we always assume that this soul is related to the being holding it. However, you can also interpret this in a different way. Maybe these Poes are beings who reside in the world between the living and the dead, and those who are stuck in limbo can be captured by Poes and are then held prisoner. This is why most Po souls can be freed by just defeating the monster holding the lantern instead of solving the issues keeping them attached to this world. We even see some ghost-type monsters collecting souls on purpose. After Ganondorf comes to power, we see a figure doing exactly this in the old guardhouse of Hyrule Castle Town. So maybe these spirits aren't stuck due to lingering issues. Instead, it made them stand still for a second too long before passing on, leading to them being captured by the Po, which certainly gives the whole thing a darker twist. But there are other horrors that can be found in Hyrule that are also stuck here, but have a much darker history. As Link leaves Kokiri Forest to fulfill his destiny, he has to traverse Hyrule Field, a vast expanse that lays between him and Hyrule Castle. But as some of you might have noticed, when you try to get across for the first time, you will never be able to make it before night falls. During this time, the drawbridge goes up, so you can't enter, and there's actually a good reason for this. During the night, an endless horde of skeletons, known as Stell Children, will spawn, and only when the sun comes up, they will leave. In many ways, these monsters are similar to most other undeads. They are either cursed beings, or lingering spirits that can't pass on to the afterlife. In later games, we can even see other beings rise out of the ground at night, like Stellhounds or Stellbokoblins. So these fields seem to be cursed somehow, but only in Ocarina of Time and games set after it, because in the Minish Cap, no undead horrors are encountered. So what changed? Well, I think that the bloodshed seen during the Hyrulean Civil War is what cursed these lands and provided the bodies that came to life at night. During this conflict, warfare and strife became common in Hyrule, as the armies of the Zora marched on the Hylians, the Gorons fought the Gerudo, and it seemed every race of Hyrule was at each other's throats. In the end, a Hylian king of great wisdom, courage, and power was able to restore peace and unify the world under the Hylian banner. However, this conflict led to a blood-stained land that became cursed, and the Stell Children we fight at night are dead Hylians who perished during this conflict. But they only appear when you're Child Link, and exclusively off-road. But when Ganon takes over, they stopped appearing, and now big Poes are seen. Do these appear here all of a sudden because they absorbed all the souls who died in these fields, which would also explain their increased size? Well, that could be. This would fit very well with our other Po theory, and explains why they are all of a sudden gone. And while over time these bodies eroded and their souls were potentially stolen, the blood and violence kept haunting these lands, leading to other beings coming back, like the dog seen in Twilight Princess. I mean, we even see a similar thing in Majora's Mask, where soldiers who died long ago came back and continued fighting. Another good example is the Stell Children seen in Twilight Princess. They are found in the Arbiter's Grounds, which is also filled with unimaginable horrors. But these aren't the only undead freaks that we encounter in the Zelda games. There's another that became cursed because of a different reason, which might be even darker than any of the others. When you start exploring the many caves and crypts found in the world of Hyrule, you will quickly come across undead nightmares known as Redeads and Gibdos. In some ways, these monsters are the same, because in many games, if you burn a Gibdo, you will see that hiding below is a Redead. Overall, they are quite vulnerable to both fire and light, and as you can see, they are quite simple creatures that don't seem to think for themselves. Instead, their behavior is completely dictated by instinct. Sometimes they can talk. For example, Gibdos in Majora's Mask demand certain items from Link when he ventures into the well below Ikana. But overall, they only really do one thing. They stand still and moan. But as soon as they notice you, they will let out a petrifying scream that freezes you in place, allowing them to slowly walk over and attack. So really, in many games, they are just standard zombies and mummies, which is something we have seen before. Well, that's what you would think at least, because in the Super Super Smash Bros. Games, the trophies of the Redeads give us some additional information. In Super Smash Bros. Melee, the trophy description says, "At first, Link was shocked at the state of the town and the apparent lack of survivors. He later learned that the townsfolk had evacuated to safety and that the Redeads were just magic animated into hideous humanoid shapes." Now, this is obviously a callback to Ocarina of Time, but it does tell us something new that we wouldn't have known otherwise. The people seen in Hyrule Castle Town did not turn into Redeads, even though that would be your first thought upon seeing them. These zombies are nothing more than dark magic animated into mindless followers. And in later Super Smash Bros. Games, we get even more information. The description in the 3DS title says, "These creatures may look like zombies, but Redeads weren't human to begin with. They appear to be clay monsters fashioned into the shape of humans." So it seems like they are clay animated by dark magic into quite simple monsters that will attack anything that moves. And as soon as one of them falls in battle, they will go to the fallen Redead and stand around it, which is a bit creepy. However, in some games, we can see that the Gibdos are truly different from their brothers and sisters and other similar beings seen in Ocarina of Time. For example, in Majora's Mask. Here, Pamela's father studies them, but after coming into contact with these creatures, or contracting the same curse, he also starts to transform. So it seems like in this game, you can become one of them by contracting the same curse. However, in other titles like Tears of the Kingdom, Nintendo seemed to return back to the basics, with Gibdos being made of sand by the looks of it. During the turmoil in the Gerudo Desert, we can see Gibdos spawning from hives. But these living corpses don't look like any of the living beings seen in this version of Hyrule. And as soon as these pillars that are endlessly creating Gibdos are destroyed, they turn back into sand. So it seems like they are once again made out of sand or clay, just like we saw in Ocarina of Time. Nothing more than an artificial corpse animated by magic. Clearly, Nintendo's a bit all over the place when it comes to the Redeads and Gibdos. They are either an inanimate object turned into a zombie-like creature with magic, a straight-up walking corpse, or a cursed being that once used to be alive. However, we have one other undead nightmare to cover that also has a dark origin story that I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. When The Legend of Zelda was first created by Nintendo, the games were populated by some of the most generic fantasy adventure enemies possible, like the Stelphos, who were just skeletons that would attack you. But as time went on, Nintendo started to develop their own lore for a lot of these evil beings, with the first bits being seen in Ocarina of Time. In this game, Stelphos are adult Hylians who accidentally wandered into a place known as the Lost Woods, a forest that is magical in some way, and so anyone who gets lost here and dies comes back as a Stelphos. Now, Nintendo never explains why this happens. It just seems like these woods change anyone who enters without a fairy to protect them from these outside magical forces, which seem to be dark in some way. Even kids who wander into this maze of trees turn into Skull Kids, cursed beings that don't even have a face. Well, in Ocarina of Time at least. Now, in later games, we see a similar thing. Dark energy bringing people back and turning them into skeletons that almost can't die. For example, in Ikana Canyon, where the king and his soldiers were turned due to the bloodshed of the previous wars and the dark magic coming from the Stone Tower. And in Twilight Princess and the Wind Waker, it also seems like that dark magic is the main force animating them. But we also encounter a Stelphos that has come to life for seemingly different reasons. The hero Shade, who used to be the hero of time and wanted to pass on his teachings. Near the end of his life, he was filled with many regrets, and so he came back as a Stelphos to help the hero who would come after him. But it could also be that the hero became cursed like so many others who entered the Lost Woods. We do know that he went on to search for Navi again after the events of Majora's Mask, and he didn't have a fairy. But we can't really be sure of this. However, one thing we can clearly see in the Zelda franchise is that these skeletal beings are either created by dark magic, or the person is still attached to this world, and so can't leave, becoming this undead monster. However, when it comes to all these enemies that we covered, very little is known about them. Nintendo loves to be a bit mysterious about the dark forces seen in the Zelda titles. So getting all the answers is very unlikely. But we also looked at a bunch of other fascinating Zelda topics. For example, why is Big Goron so big? What is the dark story behind the Skull Kid? What is the true cost of creating a Zora armor set? And why can stone taluses all of a sudden be found in the world of Hyrule? So check those videos out right now. Aside from that, I stream here on YouTube every week, so be sure to stop by, and be sure to leave a like and subscribe so you won't miss any future videos.